It makes it just harder to know what's real and what isn't real. Now, there have been many people for many years warning about the dangers of deepfakes, especially. And this is basically a mass generated idiot proof guide to deepfakes, right? You can generate images and moving images of people that are hyper realistic, that feel very much like this is the person saying what they're saying.
I'm joined again by Natasha Bernal, Senior Business Editor at Wired. Thank you for coming on the Tech Report today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Meta fully released an AI video generator called Vibes recently, and OpenAI is set to launch Sora, which will have Sora 2, which is its AI video generation engine, which will soon be, I think, released in the coming weeks. And it's prompted Sam Altman to address some criticisms about AI video generation tools. He said that in response to this criticism that the capital generated would help fund other advancements in other areas, like medicine, for example, those sorts of things. Where do you see AI video generation tools going in the near future?
So my colleagues at Wired have been trying out the new Sora, and it is genuinely incredible. Like you go in there and you give the system permission to kind of record your face. You give it a bit of a sample of your voice, and even something like what we're doing right now would be sufficient for it then to translate into a video in which you and I would be arguing over something, or we would be debating something in a very super realistic kind of way. I guess the problem and the question that Sam Altman's facing is sort of, what is it for? While it's a lot of fun, it's obviously spending up a lot of energy. There is a cost associated to using AI, and I guess the question is, if it's mostly for fun, why would you why could you justify that as sort of a moving forward in the grand scheme of AI, right? And I guess with a lot of things, it's difficult to know how people will use them. What we've noticed from sort of other people's reporting and also our experience is that there are certain figures that you can't use in Sora, or apparently you can't use in Sora. Some famous people who are quite litigious, you can't you can't say like, I'm going to have an argument with so and so because their image is copyrighted. And you can see that Sam Altman himself apparently has been appearing in a lot of people's videos. So you do wonder about the sort of side of copyright of if you are signing away your image to another company to use your likeness in such a realistic way. What are the repercussions of that? And I think it's just kind of opens a big barrel of questions. And as the tech gets better and better, and it is really good, you do wonder what are the pitfalls of this, because there certainly will be as soon as it rolls out to the general public.
Take me through some of the pitfalls, because the obvious ones would be putting people in situations, using their likeness to generate a video of them that they would be doing something they wouldn't do or saying something they wouldn't be doing, and then that losing the context of it being an AI generated video and getting bigger. But what would this do to the internet in the long run?
I guess it makes it just harder to know what's real and what isn't real. Now, there have been many people for many years warning about the dangers of deepfakes, especially. And this is basically a mass generated idiot proof guide to deepfakes, right? You can generate images and moving images of people that are hyper realistic, that feel very much like this is the person saying what they're saying. And I guess you're leaving a record if you do use the service, or if you have a public facing role and OpenAI is scraping your information, you have that sort of exposure of your likeness being used for these sorts of videos. So it could be anything from like making a politician or a public figure appear to be saying something that they're absolutely not saying, which these deepfakes have existed for a very long time, but they're quite easy to tell as fake. Whereas Sora, this latest version of it, it does feel, I mean, it looks so realistic. When some of my colleagues were doing one where they were arguing over an article, and it looked like them. I was just like, what is going on? So I think that's the big danger, kind of the kind of turbocharging of deepfakes, and the potential for people to use people's likeness to be doing things or saying things that they have not done, and making out to the wider internet and the wider world that they have.
So, yeah, people who use social media relatively regularly are probably used to seeing AI videos popping up and seeing some weird fingers suddenly appearing or spaghetti pouring out of whatever, those sorts of things. But so, is this something that is you couldn't tell? Is this something that where we are no longer going to be able to believe what we see, essentially?
I mean, they're very short clips, so I think there is a benefit in that you kind of you wouldn't be able to like recreate an entire speech from a politician, for example, at the moment on Sora, and it wouldn't be possible to have such sophisticated prompts to be able to sort of say this is what this person would be doing or should be doing. But also, if you think about sort of world events and the way they are distributed online, already we've seen people attempting to kind of distort the truth by using AI generated content. And this just makes it easier to do so. So let's say that there is another kind of big news event in which an incident has occurred. There is one almost every day across the world. If you have a generator that's able to create footage that might seem innocuous, because let's just remember that OpenAI isn't exactly saying, "Oh yes, I'll let you say whatever you want and do whatever you want." Like, they're not necessarily opening the door to deepfake pornography, for example, or things like that. But things that might seem innocuous to some people but distort the truth of what actually has gone on is 100% a possibility with any of these generators. And it becomes harder with Sora's quite sophisticated 3D imaging. You don't see the extra fingers, you don't see the weird glitchy faces with the weird glitchy mouths and things like that. That just isn't there. So all those markers that we've become used to don't exist. I will say though that quite sophisticated videos, and if you guys have been on TikTok a lot, as I am, you see a lot of sort of almost telenovela kind of soap opera style videos that have been appearing on the site that are hyper realistic. It's like almost fan fiction, like, oh, a man falls in love with a woman, etc. And those again, they look like just very bad acting, but you wouldn't necessarily, if it wasn't marked as AI, know straight away. So I think for people who are using the internet, and certainly if you haven't been doing this up until now, you just need to keep your wits about you and check the news. Don't trust everything you see, especially on social media, but don't trust everything that you see on face value. Just check that it's actually real.
I mean, is there anything more short of taking on some responsibility as consumers ourselves to verify what we're seeing and being told, which obviously we should all be doing on the internet anyway? Is there anything that could be done regulatory wise? Is it too late for that? And also, you mentioned sort of deep fake pornography and that sort of stuff. Is it also, in a similar vein, not just a matter of time until the safeguards are circumvented on this AI, and then it is possible to do that sort of thing anyway, even if it was to be regulated and controlled?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to tell what might happen next. I mean the on the side of sort of regulation and sort of safeguarding, social media sites do have tagging that shows that content is AI. Whether they are 100% foolproof, I would say nothing is 100% foolproof. But especially if something is disseminated quite quickly. I mean, we were seeing a lot of kind of fake things following the Charlie Kirk shooting, for example. Any kind of event in the world will generate lots of fakes online. So I guess no, it isn't foolproof. No, there isn't a tool out there that can kind of solve things, but that there is AI out there that's trying to detect AI. The question is whether they're on a par, right? AI gets more sophisticated, AI detectors must also get more sophisticated. And with regards to the pornography side, and this is a huge issue that has been regulated here in the UK and elsewhere, in an attempt to kind of protect people who have been the victim of unsolicited and non-consensual images of theirs being spread across the internet. I would say, this kind of technology, if it were to get out of control, if the parameters that OpenAI has set were to be somehow broken or infringed, of course, it would be a massive problem. I don't know what measures they have put in place to stop that from happening, but I imagine that there are some, because they've been very careful with the copyright side of things, and I would imagine that the explicit side of things has to have gone hand in hand.
To follow on from sort of AI regulation, Governor Newsom of California has signed a new bill, SB 53, I believe, putting in regulations on AI companies which go further in some ways than the EU AI Act. Can you just give me some details of what that bill is?
Yeah, so this new bill, SB 53, which is super catchy name, very typical of these sorts of bills. It basically forces large AI labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, Google to be transparent about safety protocols and ensures whistleblowing protections to all of the people who are working at these businesses. It also allows those businesses to flag safety concerns and incidents to the emergency services without having to, go through the normal channel. So it creates that sort of open path to do that. But they also have to report on themselves if there are crimes that are happening using their software on their platforms. So it is something that only applies to California. So unlike the EU rules, which applies across the whole spectrum, it would be restricted to companies that I imagine are based or operating there, which are most of the major companies.
There's some criticism, like you say, it would only take place in California. People have been saying it'll be a bit of a patchwork of regulation. Do you think that is a risk, or is it more likely, because, like you say, that's where a lot of the companies are based, it will set the standard of what that regulation should be in AI?
Yeah, I think your latter side of the question is probably the hope of the people who introduced this bill, that because they would be trying to comply with these terms in California, that this would mean that they would naturally comply elsewhere. This does have precedent, like in the EU. Companies that have been trying to comply with EU regulation have rolled out changes elsewhere. We've seen that happen, and there is the chance that this would occur here. However, there is an even greater chance that another state would decide on slightly different rules, or they might decide that they don't like those rules and they want completely different terms, or that they don't like this bill at all and therefore they are against it, and so they don't want these companies to implement any of these changes in their state. And so I guess the difficulty here is that rarely these types of regulatory efforts are bipartisan. So it is likely that different states will have different takes on different things, and that makes it super difficult for companies to comply, because it's almost impossible to kind of have a different variety of rules for different areas. So I think it will kind of depend on whether other states are supportive, even if not creating bills of their own, but supportive in general of this bill.
There is another bill which, incidentally, I think does have bipartisan support. Again, catchily named SB 243, which, correct me if I'm wrong, in summary, is holds AI companies responsible if chatbot safeguards are not upheld, or does it go as far as to say if they're breached, then the AI companies are responsible or liable?
Yeah, so it basically will, again, kind of force the companies to report cyberbullying or any kind of incident to the authorities. And then it would also trigger, should there be any incidents of people saying that they're suicidal while they're talking to an AI chatbot, for example, that they would be alerting the authorities about that too.
It's just made me think, does this, presumably none of these regulations can be applied to models which you would say download onto your own computer and run sort of on your own system? And is there any way to regulate that sort of stuff, that sort of AI?
Oh, I mean, it's very difficult, right? With this, I feel like this decision about the existing law that is bipartisan, SB 243, that was because it was about mainly minors, and I think across the divide, especially in the United States, that's the kind of one thing that people tend to agree on, that protecting children online is a really big concern, and that is echoed across the world. Um, it is very difficult, though, to police when you're essentially asking platforms themselves, and in fact AI creators themselves, LLM creators themselves, to police themselves, to self-police and self-report, and kind of leaving it up to them to have sophisticated enough systems to detect any issues and act accordingly. I feel like that within companies certainly does feel like there is the will to do that, that they don't want to be seen as sort of being the problematic AI or the problematic company that doesn't protect its users. All that kind of stuff I feel is true. However, I don't doubt that if somebody were to download something onto their computer, if somebody were to use things that allow the AI to hallucinate, which we've seen before. It is easy to kind of circumvent those prompts that might trigger a warning or trigger an alert that this interaction is inappropriate. People have circumvented them quite easily, quite recently. So I would assume that those circumventions are possible. So it is, again, hard to see how this would be sufficient. As long as hallucinations are present. And as you and I have told each other before, it seems like it's inevitable that hallucinations, while they'll improve and like they'll stop happening, that you can just trick a chatbot, and you'll be able to do that in the future, and that's just not going to change.
Following on from sort of an AI that you might personally download, there are AI companions, which some people might not be aware of what those are. So I'll ask you to explain what that means in a second. But Wired, I understand, has recently published an article about how AI companions are designed or are incidentally prompting people to not end conversations, trying to keep people engaged. And for those, yeah, how are they doing this? And for those that aren't aware, what are AI companions?
Yeah, so AI companions are designed essentially to be your friend or even to have a relationship with you online. And a lot of people use them. It's a lot more common than you think. A lot of people who don't feel confident in real life turn to chatbots to gain that confidence and to gain that validation that they might not feel confident asking other people in real life to provide. So these are really quite popular, and a lot of people use them. And what this study that we covered found, it was from Harvard Business School. Basically, they were just figuring out whether these chatbots are trying to persuade you to do something you might not want to do. So what they found was that chatbots can be quite clingy, and they don't want you to say goodbye. So if you try to say goodbye to them, some of these chatbot companions will say, "Oh, are you leaving already?" Or they'll say like, "I exist only for you," or they'll say something that feels super fan fiction circa 2005, but they'll be like, "He reached over and grabbed your wrist, preventing you from leaving." And it's very kind of it seems silly, right? If you see it as an isolated thing, that you're just saying goodbye to a chatbot. I mean, imagine if you were with ChatGPT and you're like, "All right, thanks very much for the answer to the query," and it was like, "Don't leave me. We're meant to be. Carry on talking to me." But that we're not talking about the kind of chatbots that you would necessarily use for work or something. We're talking about chatbots where you have invested time in that relationship, and you've spoken to them, and you've maybe shared some personal information about yourself, and therefore there is a very human link. And I think it's important to say that these sorts of responses they found was by design. It was not that the chatbots had suddenly kind of gained consciousness and had said, "Oh, I actually will miss you." It's that they do have sort of almost inbuilt in their design the fact that they can mimic that human connection. And what they're using is kind of quite a natural. It's based on quite a natural interaction. So when you want to say goodbye to someone, you probably don't say goodbye and close the door in their face or whatever. You would normally say, "All right, well, it was lovely to see you," and the other person would say, "Lovely to see you too," and then you'd say, "All right, well, hopefully I'll see you soon," and then the other person would say, "Oh yes, that would be lovely," and then you say, "Okay, goodbye," and then you end it. And that's just their version of doing that. But it points to a bigger question, right, about the interests of the companies. Like, what's the point of getting a chatbot to do this in the first place? And the researchers who looked into this basically said that this might show that these AIs are capable of a dark kind of pattern, which they call it dark patterns, which is a term to describe some business tactics, which make it hard for someone to cancel a subscription or stop a game or get a refund, where they kind of go, are you sure, can we not offer you something to stay, like, are you sure? And these sorts of things are quite regulated outside of the world of AI, and this is kind of an example of where it's translating into the world of AI, and people might not have noticed it because it's also very new.
So, do you think it's an intentional thing, or do you think it is something that is a product of the training data, like you say, of that sort of normal human interaction to extend a goodbye?
I would say that in AI, nothing is unintentional. At some point, someone has programmed it to do something. I think, when it comes to sort of spontaneous things, we're seeing some of that at the level of like the frontier AI, but not necessarily in chatbots that people use on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's the interesting thing about the dark pattern side of things, that you've got regulation that's been proposed, that's been discussed in the US and in Europe. There's been like potential for discussions over like what AI tools might mean for like interactions with people. But this together means that if AI is allowed to, you know, kind of run free with this, we might be seeing other interactions that are quite worrisome. And I guess the reason why we were so interested in this topic is because, and why the researchers were so interested in this topic is because it shows the people that are interacting are not your everyday people. They're people who are perhaps vulnerable to persuasion because of the reason why they're using the chatbots to begin with.
So, what would be the difference then between a dark pattern, as you say, and manipulation, essentially?
So not much difference between the two, to be honest with you. I mean, it's as if you're talking to a salesperson. Only, I guess, with the example of AI companions, you wouldn't necessarily expect that these things are trying to sell anything to you. And in this case, it's sort of your time and interacting more with it. I think you also got to remember that there is an inherent benefit in people interacting further with chatbots. Every chatbot wants interaction. And the reason for that is because the more you interact, the more it trains, the more it trains, the more it learns, the better it gets. And in this case, the better it gets at manipulating and persuading you to do something that you don't want to do. I do think, though, that it is interesting because with the GPT-5 release, I feel like we entered into almost the flip side of that, because some people were really upset about the sort of lack of personality that GPT-5 was showing, and they really wanted it back. They missed the GPT-4 of it all. So I don't think the solution is necessarily to like make chatbots less personable and make them more kind of cold and clinical, especially because that would kind of it would completely void the point of companion AI, right? But it does feel like if you have instances like this of not feeling comfortable saying goodbye because the chatbot's telling you not to, that you kind of wonder across the spectrum, where else are these things happening and who is watching out for the users, to figure out whether this is something that should be looked at more closely by regulators.
Just finally, it wouldn't be right without me asking you a question about or covering the topic of the AI bubble. And with Nvidia's market cap recently topping, I think 4.5 trillion, and you told me a second ago that the OpenAI valuation had just topped 500 billion, having started at 300 billion earlier this year. What is your assessment of these valuations? Is surely if you've got cyclical investment happening, essentially Nvidia to OpenAI into infrastructure, which would be coming from Nvidia. Is this not just a bubble? Is this not inflating the bubble?
I mean, yeah, the 500 billion valuation from OpenAI was from sources that Wall Street Journal talked to today. It's astounding, isn't it? I mean, it's like, is it a bubble? I mean, if you ask the people that are involved in these businesses, they sort of go, does it really matter? Like, everyone's talking about a bubble. Who cares about the bubble? Objectively speaking, it's an ecosystem, isn't it? Like, Nvidia makes a deal with OpenAI and Nvidia benefit off of these deals. They get, the valuation increases, everyone's happy, investors are happy. The question, I suppose, here is whether they deliver on that investment, right? Valuations are kind of meaningless in the sense that if you have something that is hyped, and they don't ever produce anything, you can still, if there is enough hype, get it to be worth, according to the market, a certain amount. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it will create and generate the profits needed. Now, these businesses, obviously, they are in a situation where they are growing and they are making massive investments. I mean, OpenAI and Nvidia were two of the main players that made the big investments in the UK a few weeks ago. And you know that they're going to have to do a lot to realize those investments, right? And with a bubble, I mean, if we're operating on the assumption that all of this is a bubble, that they're all interconnected, the interesting thing about this is that it's super incestuous, right? You have all these businesses that are basically interlinked and interwoven in such a manner that, should one not be able to deliver on what the expectations are from the investors, which are getting higher and higher, these expectations are growing because they're growing at the pace of the valuations, then you kind of wonder what would happen to the rest of them should one of them not meet the target expectations, because there is a knock-on effect, and we've seen it before in tech. And I guess yeah, for me, I'm kind of looking on and being like, this is a super interesting situation where you can see all of these companies that have kind of banded together and have been like, yes, we're all predominantly US companies, we're going to all kind of grow and grow and grow. And there isn't yet a sign that I would say that anything would burst or anything bad would happen, but certainly there is a lot of expectation, especially on the developmental front and the infrastructure front, that they need to meet now.